Hey everyone, Chris here. I'm recording this Thursday, November 13th. This is the week of the 13th, but I'm recording the week of the 14th lecture ahead of time just so that y'all have access because I know the week after that's Thanksgiving. So wanted to just kind of get this out there for folks who want to work ahead a bit. And then after the week off, gosh, we only have 1 week left. I'm going to be working on grading your recorded sessions. So just know that slowly you're going to be getting those grades in. And if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to email me. I've got a reminder that I'm going to do as well that I put in the lecture. So let's get started. You get to see me try to share my screen. Cool. Go into view. There we go. Awesome. So yeah, like I said, we are in week 14, which is treatment planning. You've got some good resources to read over today, so definitely take a look at those. Let me know if you have any questions around those. But yeah, this week, yeah. Our check-in today, I wanted to share about for me, something that's come about as something that I've discovered as important to me, which is kind of setting rituals at the beginning of it and end of each day. I think I've already mentioned this before, at least once or twice. But one of my first jobs when I was 16, I worked at a bookstore. It was like a new agey type bookstore in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And it was called Falling Water. It doesn't exist anymore, which is sad. Or wait, no, this was Crazy Wisdom. Yeah, Crazy Wisdom. They had these little cards out that, you would draw three, and it was basically like, a day, like what your intentions were for the day, right? Whether or not you believe in stuff like, drawing cards or fortunes from fortune cookies or tarot or astrology or things like that, or even if you don't, um, sometimes just kind of setting an intention for the day can be nice, something to just kind of ground you. So one of the things I've been doing, the cards that I'm using are angel cards. I'm not necessarily religious, and I don't know that I necessarily believe in angels, but these cards were kind of just what were used when I worked at that Crazy Wisdom bookstore in Michigan, uh, when I started working, and they've kind of followed me everywhere I go. So I light a little tea light candle, maybe. Ooh. And then, so I have this was like at the Dollar Tree. I got like this little tea light cold candle holder. And then there are just a bunch of cards in here. And so usually I think to myself, like, what do I need to know about today? And so this will be for our lecture, but for you today as well, like, whenever you're watching this. So what is our intention for today? We have birth, new beginnings, uh, acceptance. Hey, that's cool. You can see a little welcome over the door. And then surrender, acceptance and surrender at the same time. That's kind of cool. So, um, I don't know. For me, I've always kind of looked at, astrology or tarot cards as more like a way of getting to know myself a little bit better. So I don't do readings or anything for other people, but I use like decks for myself just because sometimes if you're feeling a bit lost, it helps to have something that gets you out of your own head, like if you don't have your own therapist. And so sometimes when you're like messing around with a deck, like a tarot deck or an oracle deck, you can pull some cards, and even if it doesn't feel like accurate or right, that gives you more information, right? And I feel like the more information I have, the more options and choices I have as well. I'm kind of like training myself almost to make an informed decision by being able to give myself as much information as possible, even if it ends up being that like, hey, I do feel this way, or I don't feel this way, or that doesn't seem quite right. Because then I'm thinking about it, you know? Um, I don't necessarily do this with my clients or anything. It's just something I do to begin my day. I'm trying to work on something to kind of end my day, but even the way you like pack up your stuff at the end of the day to go home, or the way you like end your work day, there are ways you can set it up so that it's more of like a ritual, so that your brain and body understand like, okay, this is done for today. We're moving on to the next thing. I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, because especially with technology, we're supposed to be available 24/7 and accessible 24/7 and just like all over the place all the time. Um, and so rituals can kind of help us move from one thing to the next. And if you don't like that word, you can, you know, change it for habit, or, practice, or what have you. It can be faith related or not necessarily, but I've found that I need that in my own life just to help me set boundaries around like my brain and where my focus is day to day. So I'm blowing out my little candle. Um, yeah, so let's go ahead and hop on in to our general reminders. Uh, so you've got week 14, and then week 15, there's just going to be another lecture. I think that one's going to be a little more kind of me reviewing some stuff, but mostly kind of talking through some of the resources I've found most helpful after graduating. A reminder, we don't have class the week of the 24th. So enjoy that time off. I know it's probably not too much time off. It's probably a lot of like getting caught up on assignments and stuff, maybe even for this class. But either way, that's okay. Just do what you got to do, right? Another reminder, just your skills demonstration. So evaluating your efforts is due December 8th. I'm going to be posting this today, so the 13th, but just a reminder as well, I think I said this last week, Dr. Perry updated the assignment, so please make sure you either attend the optional synchronous Zoom meeting, or make sure you at least visit that page and review it, the assignment piece, and then review the recording that I'll be doing next week. Okay. I'm still deciding Sunday or Monday. If anybody particularly wants a day or time, let me know. I can try to make it work. Okay. You have the optional makeup assignments. You can also go back and complete your classwork, the weekly classwork, if you didn't. So go ahead and take a look at your grade there. And if there's anything missing, feel free to reach out to me, or you can also do like an optional makeup assignment instead. And don't hesitate to reach out to me with any questions you might have as we're kind of coming to the end of the semester here. Okay. So treatment planning and evaluation. I am going to be totally real with y'all. This is something that I'm still working on myself. Um, like insurance companies want us to do things a certain way, and I feel like so much of what we do is qualitative. So it's the touchy-feely stuff that's hard to measure, and trying to translate that into the quantitative. So like the numbers, the facts, the research, there's definitely ways to do it, but trying to put that all in a treatment plan that is actually, actionable and makes sense to the client, or the people we're working with, and also that we can update regularly. It's kind of a lot, and I'm learning that it takes practice, right? Because the target is always kind of moving too, as far as like what best practice might be. Um, so be gentle with yourself if you have to do treatment plans, and just know that it's okay to get them wrong. It's better to have something kind of crappy written in there to try. And then just know that like over time, you can build on these skills. There's always trainings available. I've actually linked one at the end of this recording that you can hop into. It's through NASW. It's an online training that you can take. I think you pay to take it if you need to, um, through NASW, but if you remember, there's a discount, all that fun jazz. Anywho, I wanted to give that disclaimer just because this is definitely something I'm still working on too. So we're going to go through writing a treatment plan, culturally responsive goals, neuro-affirming goals, Other stuff to keep in mind, task and project planning. So this is like if we're trying to do like a task oriented, like solution focused um, type of thing, or if we're, working with groups more in particular, how we evaluate our progress and, the client in particular, their progress, but then also ourselves as, as social workers, how are we doing? How's our organization doing? Are we effectively doing the things that we said we'd do? And um, just some ideas for how to close a therapy session. Um, and I've included a solo reflection in there too, as well as some tips just from, me being in the field right now doing the thing. So I'm going to try to keep it short and sweet. I know last week was a bit of a longer one. This might be as well, from being honest. So buckle in. Here we go. So writing a treatment plan, unfortunately, they frame it as a problem. So what is the problem? Um, it might be, I don't know, I feel like there are better words for that. It's just so not social worky to use the word problem. This is the client's main concern in their own words. You keep it broad, like super broad. Like if it's anxiety is like impacting my ability to enjoy and do my day-to-day life, Um, the goal, again, use their words. You can even use quotations. So, like when I'm doing an intake, I will actually literally type some of what the client is saying and just put quotation marks around it, just so that it's obvious that this is their language and not mine. Um, it does take time to develop and refine a goal. So don't freak out if you don't have one right away or if it feels weird or not quite right. You can work on this by, training yourself. There's so many resources available. You can also work with like your supervisors or peers, colleagues. There are lots of great resources out there to kind of hone in on what sounds like a good goal. But ultimately, it's usually the insurance companies who are saying yay or nay on this stuff. And again, it's a moving target. They kind of change what they're looking for sometimes. So your objective, uh, this is your own clear and accessible language. So this is this is where you put down like specifically what you're trying to do in order to demonstrate that you have met the goal or that you're working towards achieving the goal. So like a SMART goal, there's a resource in your module, which is, let's see here, it's specific, measurable, attainable, the R, which I totally don't remember right off the top of my head, and then T, I think it's timely. Um, so it's just keeping in mind, again, trying to translate the qualitative to the quantitative. Um, this is where you state what the client's going to focus on to meet their goal. So if the goal is my anxiety, I want to reduce my anxiety because it is interfering with my ability to do my day-to-day life, we can say, for example, the GAD-7, right? Um, Client will report uh, decreased levels of anxiety as demonstrated via reducing GAD-7 score by 2 points or that kind of thing, right? Again, trying to make it that qualitative into the quantitative, right? At the end of the day, it's really the client's experience of it and perspective of it. Another helpful evaluation tool with this is the stages of change. So figuring out where they are in the stage of change, and then, the goal would be to get to the next stage of change, maybe. And this is a recurring point of evaluation. So you can have many objectives leading towards the goal. But these are things that, they might be like the steps that are broken down over time to get to that goal. So like reducing anxiety by learning and implementing at least 3 new techniques to try in the moment and use at least 50% of the time or something like that. Intervention, so this is your own clear and accessible language describing the techniques, strategies, modalities, interventions and resources that you will provide to support the client in meeting their goal. So, for example, if we keep on the anxiety kind of track here, I would say like CBT, DBT would be like the modalities, probably some psychoeducation just to learn about anxiety and how it shows up in the body and things that we can do to mitigate that. CBT is good for like reframing the thoughts in our head. So if the anxiety is like a thought spiral where the client just like goes down worst case scenarios and like can't get out of that, CBT would be good to address the thinking piece of it. DBT, there might be some good techniques as far as like grounding ourselves. Like, I think name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can smell, like that kind of technique. I think that falls under the DBT. Just again, kind of off the cuff here. The intervention is like your piece of how we're getting the client to their goal via the objective. So I hope that makes sense. So another example for this would be like the problem is that the client has a fear of spiders, right? A fear of spiders. The goal is that they want to be able to be home alone without constantly being worried that they're going to come across a spider and have like a panic attack, right? So the objective would be to, uh, I think we would use exposure therapy. So that is something that we can do. Like right now, I've got a client who is very scared of like thunderstorms and rain, lightning, thunder. No, she's 9, and her dad had her watch Twister when she was young. And so that's something that we're eventually trying to get her to the point of like the objective would be client will demonstrate reduced anxiety and fear around storms. Or since this is a kiddo, I would say like clients, parents, and school will report clients' behavior has improved when it is storming outside, or like reduced anxiety behaviors, those kinds of things. So the intervention would be the exposure therapy. And then we would just kind of build in, like the first thing is to maybe, you know, talk about spiders a little bit. And then the second thing is to maybe look at a picture of a spider. And then eventually we work our way up to the point where we've got like a spider in the hand, you know. I don't have a spider handy, but I'm sure there would be one that I could snag. It doesn't have to be a tarantula or anything, but like, you know, eventually that exposure therapy. Okay. Doo-doo-doo. So with culturally responsive goals, we want to make sure that we identify, discuss, and address, as well as respond to barriers to goals. So like, for example, if the client has difficulty with remaining sober, one of the barriers to their goal of sobriety could be transportation. Maybe they don't have access, like a way of getting to point A to point B if they're wanting to do like meetings in person, you know, or like group support meetings in person. Um, that's something that we could either set up, or there's like virtual offerings a lot of times, in addition to, you know, in person. Um, I think a lot of us are good at coming up with excuses, right? So this is kind of talking through the biggest of those. Like, what are the things that are preventing us from achieving the goals that we're talking about here? Um, Holistic. We obviously collect the biopsychosocial, spiritual, cultural information in the assessment so that we can kind of support in all of the domains of life, right? And if we don't have the ability of supporting, like for example, I wouldn't necessarily want to support in the spiritual side of things, but if in my assessment I learned that somebody has a particular faith practice and they, you know, attend weekly meetings or sermons or, what have you, uh, talking to them about accessing that community of support if something's happening, right? A lot of churches, synagogues, synagogues and mosques will offer, temporary like emergency grants if someone in their community is in need, or sometimes they offer childcare or even just support, like emotional support. Like, hey, I want to bring this to my community and just say, I'm really struggling with this thing, and I would really like your prayers or your thoughts, or just to be held accountable, right? So that I am able to, maintain my progress here. That's one of the, honestly, when I am doing an intake and somebody has a strong like faith community, that can be so helpful. And if somebody does have a faith practice but doesn't have a community, getting them connected with one in their area can be super beneficial as well. Um, so anywho, uh, it's again, it's knowledge, like as we get to know the person and know what supports them and what helps them, and what kind of barriers they're facing. The holistic piece allows us to identify some of the strengths and some of the areas that we can help support in or continue to cheerlead them on, like that they're already doing for themselves, or the skills they've already built for themselves or taught themselves. So again, culturally responsive goals are strengths based. So we highlight those cultural connections, their resiliency, um, the existing resources, and all of that piece of like what's working now, what they've already been able to accomplish on their own, and the ways that they've been able to show up for themselves and for the others in their lives. Um, we do want to be careful with wording with resiliency because, especially for folks who have experienced trauma and have experienced like um, complex trauma or um, kind of multiple traumas over their lifetime, it can sound a bit, I don't want to say contrite. There's a kind of dual meaning sometimes with resiliency that can potentially be negatively interpreted or felt by the client or by the community. Um, like just with, I mean, ideally we wouldn't be experiencing trauma at all. But the resiliency factor, it's like, oh, you're so resilient, or oh, you've got all of this going for you, or oh, I guess it can sound dismissive is more what I'm trying to say. Um, I hope that makes sense. If not, let me know. We want to encourage and support healing within their cultural community. So the person or the family or the group in front of us, like if they have like a community center or a library, I mean, again, cultural can mean a lot of different things. And so if they have a neighborhood that has a bunch of, families and kids like that they want to be more involved with, like if that community doesn't exist, you can also encourage folks to start building that community, and helping to facilitate the resources around that as far as just like getting them the education around how to start like a neighborhood, just kind of hangout or that kind of thing. Part of the reason I love theater so much is that even if you don't, even if theater's not your thing, right? It could be sports, it could be, soccer or football or what have you. There are so many things and activities that we can do that bring us all together and can bring us together. Um, that like even if it's not theater, even if it's not, the things that I enjoy doing, there are going to be other people that enjoy doing this thing too. So, oh gosh, there are like D&D campaigns now, so Dungeons and Dragons. Um, some people do like virtual therapy that are like support groups, but it's all playing playing video games online, and it's like a support group, but we're all working towards this thing together of playing this game together and learning about our feelings and certain skills and all of that, but just through the medium of like video games or Dungeons and Dragons, like doing a role-playing game, an RPG together. That's a great way to learn social skills, you know? Um, and definitely use the client's language. Again, using what they're saying as the barrier and not presuming what clients might consider as a barrier, right? Um, like for example, if I have a client who is queer identifying, I don't want to assume that they have like experienced any negatives around that or any pushback around that until they tell me if they have experienced something like that or if they feel comfortable sharing that. Some people haven't, right? Um, the other thing I would say too is culture can be generations. So again, don't presume like older, like grandparents taking care of like their grandkids, you know, being primary caregivers and having custody. That doesn't necessarily mean there's like a generational gap that that needs to be addressed. But it's something to just be aware of that if it does come up, we can be like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, no, that's something we can throw in as a barrier, but it's not always going to be the case. Hope again, hope that makes sense. So neuro-affirming goals. Again, you have a really great resource in your module for this week to read. I think it's just a few pages, so take a look at that. You want to resist normativity bias and ableism. So some therapists and like some therapy and modalities in the past have been um, really about reinforcing normality. Like we want you to be normal in school. We want you to essentially teaching masking and eliminating like stimming behaviors such as like tapping or like you know, fidgeting. Like right now my leg is going like I just, you know, kind of blah, 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 blah. Those kinds of things because um, neurodiverse people can be perceived as annoying, uncomfortable, or just that they're behaving in a not socially acceptable way to the broader society. So this is like at schools, this is in public, like at the grocery store. Um, Really, when I'm out shopping and stuff and I hear a kiddo crying, I'm assuming everybody's doing their best, right? Um, because I don't know what that situation is, and it's kind of none of my business, right? Um, I don't want to assume that the kiddo is, you know, one way or another. I'm not there to diagnose anybody, but I am assuming that the parent is doing their best or the guardian's doing their best, and also that the kiddo's doing their best too. We all kind of learn our own ways of dealing with stuff, and until we learn better uh, or different ways of doing things, we don't really have the choice of having different reactions, if that makes sense. Um, but the goal isn't to eliminate this individual's, you know, ability to show up as themselves, right? Like if they're stimming, that is because they need to be stimming. And so if we're telling them that that's bad and we don't want them to do that and it's distracting for other students, that basically just says that like you're not okay and this is not okay and you have to hide who you are. There are ways of stimming that are less distracting or less noisy or less disruptive to like classrooms and stuff. That might be a great reason to, you know, bring in an occupational therapist just to find some different ways of stimming or engaging in the classroom. Or maybe, you know, different ways of learning. Maybe there's just, I need the notes in front of me to be able to follow along, or else I'm just not going to be able to pay attention, you know, that kind of thing. Um, you want to ask why a person is seeking to shift their behaviors to be more socially acceptable in the first place. So, like, um, you know, if you get a referral from a school because of behavioral concerns of a student, it's like, okay, talk to me more about that. What's going on? Um, because it's also usually like if a kiddo is showing up, it's not because they're saying I need to see a therapist. It's usually because somebody who interacts with them on a pretty regular basis is seeing something that is concerning to them or that is disruptive to like a larger group, you know? And what does socially acceptable behavior mean to that person who's doing the referring, but also to the client, to the kiddo, you know? Um, you want to try to focus on boundaries, consent, and self-advocacy. So being able to speak up for oneself, like, this is disturbing to me. Like, I don't like this conversation, or I don't like this material, to the point where it's like it feels like it's triggering me. Or, and I know trigger is another word too that can be overused and has kind of entered into the public domain as far as overuse. But really, like, setting and establishing boundaries with a workplace or school, um, at the home, and helping that individual develop language to express themselves. Or even, gosh, even with couples, sometimes I have a client who is borderline personality disorder, has that diagnosis, and has had it like her whole life. um, and so I work with her to come up with ways of communicating with her husband. And it can even just be as simple as, like, just agree on a word that you don't use in normal conversation. I don't know if y'all have watched Ted Lasso, but Oklahoma, for those of you who know, like, if you are having an argument, or if somebody starts spiraling, you can just say the safe word, or the word that, like, lets your partner know, hey, I'm seeing this starting to happen, so we need to take a time out and maybe take a break. There are ways of doing that in a school setting or in a work setting, depending on who all is involved and who all has has a stake in, making this work. Cool. Mhm. So other stuff to keep in mind, uh, flipping the client's internal dialogue or narrative is often the first point of intervention. So you want to get to know, what's your thought process? Like, when you're alone in bed at night and you can't get to sleep and you're starting to just kind of spiral, what are the thoughts going through your head? Um, this is like a CBT, like, mainline point, right? Is just cognitive reframing. So taking those thoughts and being able to make it more of a conversation, you know, um, managing the expectations of the client, of ourselves as the clinicians, um, our organization, and, like, other players in the field, right? Like, there are lots of expectations that, people might have coming into the room, or parents might have for a kiddo, or a family might have for just fix my kid. Or, we've all seen, I mean, therapists are now regular people that we see in shows and movies, all of that. So no matter what the person's background, they probably are coming in with some sort of idea or an expectation, whether or not they realize it. And so getting a sense of what they're hoping to accomplish, but also, like, what's viable, and kind of the timeline, like, just being realistic about that and being real about it from the front too. Um, you want to make sure that you're linking the diagnosis, if you're diagnosing, to the goal or goals. Um, in in treatment planning and therapy, there's like this thing, the golden thread. So you just want to make sure it's all under the same umbrella, right? So if somebody has anxiety, I'm not going to measure their progress by doing the PHQ-9 with them, right? Like, if anxiety is the main problem that they're presenting with, or the main concern that they have. I'm more so going to be talking about, like, the GAD-7, or, those kinds of things. Sorry, bug. You want to link your treatment plan to every progress note. So you've got your intake assessment, you've got your treatment plan, which sets up the goals and everything, and you eventually come back around to the treatment plan. Usually it's like every 6 months or every year, depending on, your setup. But every session you have a progress note, which is not as intensive, but you just want to make sure you're bringing in the treatment plan every progress note that you're writing, just so that it all kind of links up. So that's that golden thread, right? If your agency or organization requires certain goals, how realistic are those goals for the client? Um, Depending on, where you're working or the type of work that you're doing. Like, for example, hospice. Um, sometimes a lot of electronic medical record systems will have drop downs for treatment plans and for goals and objectives and all of that. Um, in hospice, a lot of the time it was like, patient will accept their terminal diagnosis and come to peace with their mortality, right? Um, but I definitely had patients who were pissed and didn't want to die. Like I had a guy who was in his mid 30s and like it's okay to be angry about that stuff. Like that goal is not going to be everybody's goal and it's not going to be achievable for everybody, right? Um so just trying to balance that and usually there's a way of finagling it so that you still have kind of the objective in mind, but also you're really personalizing it. And that's really what insurance companies are getting at is they don't want cookie cutter drop down versions of treatment plans, right? Like where you just pick a thing. They want it to be tailored to each client, each patient, each family, each couple. Um, you want to assess the client's stage of change and tailor the treatment plan around that stage. So that makes sense. You wouldn't be, you know, planning for the end of that stage or that cycle if you're, more towards the middle, um, or even more towards the beginning. And be aware that formal evaluation may be provided by or required by another agency or insurance. So, like, for example, um, if I do an ADHD diagnosis, I have to have at least two different forms of testing. So there are a couple of ADHD scales that you can use. Or if it's a kiddo, you can talk to parents because there are some that are from the parent's perspective that can help give you insight. So, but like, for example, I would not be able to diagnose somebody to be on the spectrum. Um, if there are folks who have had like specific training to be able to do that type of diagnosis. So I would need to do a referral if that's something we want to test for. But yeah, so task and project planning. This is something like if you're thinking about with a group, so like group therapy, um, or like with a family, uh, after or like in tandem with the group formation, you want to make sure that you're identifying the strengths, interests, and group roles. So, like if I'm facilitating the group, I'm the facilitator. If I've got a co-facilitator, I'm, introducing them. But also like we're talking about why we're all here. Um, if it's a group about social skills, like cool. So let's talk about what's going on with everybody and let's talk about what's going well and what's not. Let's talk about social skills. And we can always bring it back to that if somebody goes off on a tangent. Um, you can identify the final goal. So like by the end of this group, the goal is that y'all have some skills to be able to engage socially with new friends, to meet new friends, and to be able to communicate with others in a way where you feel like they're actually hearing you and understanding what you're saying, as opposed to, not feeling it's coming off a certain way, right? Like you have an attitude or something. Um, again, we break it down like what those smaller pieces are that will lead to the goal. And then we delegate tasks based on the members' strengths and interests. So again, D&D would be like a great group for building social skills because you're all working towards one thing. You have to use your imaginations a bit, but it is about communication and it's about achieving a goal together and working together to, get to the other side of a goal. You want to regularly check in with the progress that's happening. Um, and that can be, through various methods of evaluation. Um, yeah, and support and motivate each other. A lot of things for me, like when I have a new client, or when I have somebody who's really kind of struggling, I try to say like, I'm here to be your biggest cheerleader. I'm not here to judge you. I'm not here to, tell you what to do. I'm here to just be like another voice, another kind of set of eyes in the situation, and to really help encourage you and get you to where you want to be. And so yeah, I'm here to be your biggest cheerleader. Evaluation, most agencies or organizations, like if you're working for like an organization that already exists, like a hospital, or like DCF, um, you know, these have surveys built in that are just automatically sent out. Apparently, I didn't know this until recently, but even in the small group practice that I work in, our EHR sends out surveys periodically to our clients that they can fill out. So it's just to elicit feedback, what's going well, what's not, what could be improved on, what do you enjoy, what's still a little crunchy, an honest review of the process, like as a team. So, for example, my onboarding process at most of my prior jobs has really sucked, like really, really sucked. And so anytime somebody that was a part of that process asked me for feedback, I was like totally open with them. I was like, honestly, it's not been great. I still feel like I have no idea what's going on or what the expectations are or how I'm being, how my work is being, judged or measured, as far as the quality. Um, be a part of the plan, the beginning, ongoing, regular frequency, and the end. Um, it's just like, again, so from the beginning, right? We talk about the end from the beginning. Um, I always say too, like as part of my intro spiel, if I have like an intake that I'm doing, like if I ever say or do anything that makes you feel uncomfortable, please let me know. That's not my goal. I want this to be a safe space for you. And I'm not perfect. I'm totally human. And like, I'm very open to feedback about, what's working, what's not. And I might ask you to, like, if I feel like something's a little off or landing weird, how we're doing and all that. And yeah, too, like, a couple sessions in, how's this going for you? Do you have any questions? Like, what else is like kind of weird or wonky, And yeah, just regularly. That's why the treatment plans, are reviewed, because we want to make sure we're still working towards those goals and what's working and what's not, so we can switch up our tactics if needed. And then at the end, like what worked really well? What were some difficulties that we had, or what were some pain points for you as the client? Um, and yeah, we want to double check with everybody who is a part of the process. So the individual person in front of us, if it was a group, like the group, just everybody who was impacted or affected, like by our intervention, right? As much as possible or reasonable, I guess I would say. So as far as endings go, we've got our clients, our supervisors, our coworkers, organizations, communities, and collaborative contacts. So these are the folks that we want to keep in mind as our time with a client is coming to an end. So, if I'm working with a kiddo who has DCF involvement, then it's like, okay, so sometimes they have like a therapeutic mentor or a psychiatrist or like a PCP, their family's involved. Sometimes there are additional people that are in the mix. And we want to make sure that those folks, and like even places that we refer to, or other agencies or resources that we refer out to, that we're considering that in our endings as well. Um, we want to be conscious of the timing. So if there's anything we want to do or say, like if there's a ceremony around it, like um, we might need that, or the client might need that, of like making it kind of a ritual, right? For the beginning and for the end of our time together. Um, if there's any particular stress that's involved, like acknowledging it and naming it, and that it's normal and okay to feel, a little bit stressed out at an ending. You also want to make sure that you place any final referrals that are needed. So like if I was in like a crisis management position, I would make sure that I referred out to like an outpatient therapist. Um, so that kind of thing. This is a closing therapy idea. So this would be like the last session together. Imagine you are going to write a book about therapy. This book might include the following chapters. So the problem, I put problem in quotes because again, I hate that word. I just feel like it's so not social worky. Um, the decisions, so like the decision to go to therapy, the decision to make some changes, the most important session. So like this would be like the thing that like, oh yeah, the things you were telling me about finally stuck, or like the way you said this one thing really stuck out to me. Another session, and then the end of therapy. So what does the end of that book, what does that last chapter look like, You can always add more chapters if you like. Um, and if you do, what would the titles be of those chapters, What would the subtitles or you know, for each chapter you can tell the story or give a summary. And this is the idea came from this particular um article that Dr. Perry had mentioned in their research. So this is just something like a way of framing it, right? If we if we could, or if it might be beneficial to the client, right? To um, acknowledge and honor the time spent together and the work that the client has done and that we've done. Um, but also like it's a story, like it's done, because at the last session, it's the last session. They might need to come back at some point, but for all intents and purposes, we're kind of where we're at, right? So this is your solo reflection here. Think about an ending with your agency, or think about ending with your agency after your internship ends. Um, like again, if this is like in a few weeks for break or in the spring, or if you don't have your internship yet, when you do get to that point, how much you say goodbye? What would be meaningful to you? Like, is there anything in particular you need from the end of the experience that you might want to ask for or to create? Some of those things might be asking your supervisor if they would be a reference for you, you know? Um, that might be thank you cards, to everybody if you have like a small internship, or to folks who have directly worked with you or impacted you in a positive way or helped you learn about yourself and the work we do. And also like what would be meaningful to your clients, your colleagues, supervisors, professors, agency, etc. So again, a thank you note or a thank you email, or um, just a follow up like, hey, I really enjoyed this, uh, this internship. I'm thinking about going into this work. Do you mind if I buy you a coffee sometime and we just chat about what it's like to do this for real, like on the other side of school, once I graduate. Um, and also like, you get to know your clients. Like you don't want to just kind of, I don't know, throw them on the street with like a sack of potatoes or something, right? Um, this can be another exercise in like incorporating ritual, or just again taking a moment to say, hey, look at all you've accomplished. That's huge. Wow. And giving them time to reflect and honestly to grieve. Like we're never given enough time to grieve, really, at all. Um, but like those old habits and patterns that we have can be very difficult to let go of. And it can be like losing parts of ourselves, or if we've developed these patterns or behaviors in response to a death or a trauma, it can be re-traumatizing to develop new coping mechanisms and to actually kind of work past and beyond and with all of that if you've had to kind of just be in survival mode forever, And so really honoring and allowing that space for the time to come to a close in whatever way that is meaningful to you or your client. And you can always ask them too, like, if this is our last session together, what would you like to do at that time? How would you like to spend this time together? So think about like specifically with your internship, is there anything you need to do? Is there any questions you have or anything you want to acknowledge, you know, with that time or what you need, right? Because that's the other thing is I don't think we think about, huh, I did all the things, I did all the things, it's done. But like for the end of this class, like what would you want to do? Hmm? Um, to also acknowledge the work that you've done. Some tips for you, and then we're done, I promise. Sorry, this has been a long one too. So some folks come into therapy thinking that it just goes on indefinitely, that we are like the whatever the flavor of the week is, like the crisis of the week. But that's not the case. The goal of therapy is to end therapy. And so trying to reorient people to that perspective can be difficult. Like even some therapists think this too, but it's like, no, it's not, this is not meant to be a forever thing. Some people might need the continuous support, but that's not the goal, right? You bring up the end and the beginning, like seriously, the first session. Um, so like when I'm talking to folks in the intake about their goals for therapy, right? Or like, what are you hoping to achieve in therapy? I frame it like end of therapy. What are the things that what's different? What's changed? What are the things that you will have achieved that signal that it's time, that we're good, you know? Quantifying the qualitative really sucks. Use your scales. The scales are not great. They're not perfect, right? But they give you something to demonstrate improvement. And keep trying new approaches. Like we're always improving things, right? I don't want to be stagnant in my work as a professional, but also as a human. So yeah, keep trying new things. Take a new training, you know, keep being curious. Uh, this is kind of like giving you something that you can use if you need it. But like if you tell people the insurance company needs to know about XYZ, or, you know, this is gonna come out, it's coming out of left field, I know, but our company likes to make sure we also track XYZ. So I'm gonna ask you a couple questions about that. Is that okay? Um, you can always, like, seriously, I can't tell you how many times I've said the insurance company likes us to have a goal. The insurance company likes us to have a plan. Because it's true, right? It's not like I'm, you know, but so many people understand that and it just clicks and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, 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 no, for sure. And it just kind of, I don't know, it jumps over a lot of awkwardness and discomfort that can come up. And here's the link to the, I think it was either an hour or an hour and a half, and I don't know exactly how much it was if you're not a member, because I think I got it for free or for like 15 bucks being an NASW member. But this is a skill or like a training that super duper helped me. Documentation skills to improve outcomes for social workers. So I'm giving you that link in case you want to save it for the future. Um, yeah, closing thoughts. I don't have any because that was a lot. Uh, I'm gonna try to make the last week just very chill. Um, yeah, I'll see if I can come up with something for us to do as well. Maybe a group chat about just what are the things we're most proud of this semester that you've accomplished, and just giving you space to honor that as like a final big classroom group chat. You know how to get a hold of me if you need anything or if you have any questions. We've got that Zoom meeting, the final synchronous optional Zoom that's coming up. So please drop into that if you have any questions about the final assignment. I'm still getting some clarity from Dr. Perry on some of that stuff. So just know, yeah, I got your back. We'll get through the end of this semester together. We've only got a few more weeks left. So just breathe, right? All right.